Hi, my name is Josh. I'm from Xbox Live, and this is Josh from Xbox Live. For 70 years, The Lord of the Rings has served as the definitive model for big, epic, plot-centric genre writing that climaxes with history-shaping battles. Every D&D campaign, every role-playing game, every video game with a party system is modeled on the Fellowship.
Yeah, the Fellowship!
But what's so cool and unique about the Fellowship is that despite having a level 900 dwarf, and a level 1000 ranger, and a level 7 billion boy, it also has a level 3 bookworm as its protagonist. How many other fantasy stories can you think of where that's the case? The thing that's really important to realize about The Lord of the Rings is that it's not actually plot-centric. It is profoundly character-centric. The big moments, those history-shaping battles, they only land so hard because we experience them through the eyes of specific characters that we care deeply about. How a story makes us care deeply about characters will ultimately remain a mystery. There are so many pieces to that puzzle, and much of it has to do with how well we understand and sympathize with what these characters want.
But it cannot stay in the Shire.
No, it can't.
What must I do?
But even if that is established clearly early on, we will quickly lose interest unless these characters are forced to change their ways, to learn and grow as a result of this adventure. The Lord of the Rings films earn their length not just because cool stuff happens, or because it's about politics that take a long time to set up, or because it's about really big armies duking it out and shaping history. No, it's because they take us on a massive journey of inner change for many characters. I'm not sure if I'm willing to claim that every character has an arc,
I feel something.
but certainly the Hobbits do. I mean, just think of how Sam goes from being too chicken shit to ask his crush for a dance, to bravely battling the near-immortal Shelob, a creature that even Sauron himself feared. Or think about how Pippin goes from being the village idiot who has no idea what's going on,
Where are we going?
to a naive war strategist.
If we go south, we can slip past Saruman unnoticed.
Or think about how Merry, who from his very first on-screen appearance is supporting others, helping his friends,
Our friends are out there. They need our help.
ends up completely alone, with no one left to support. Merry has to fight tooth and nail just to do anything that might in some way end up helping his friends. What I love so much about Merry and Pippin's arcs is that they both have to fight to become what they already are. Pippin's clumsiness never goes away. He just harnesses it in the right places. Merry never becomes a great warrior who is able to kill
The Witch King of Angmar.
No, but he does become a great support who sets someone else up for that glory. This idea of having to fight to become what you already are is maybe best expressed in King Théoden's arc. When we first meet Théoden, his mind is completely controlled by Saruman. To all appearances, however, he's an old man without any willpower. He has given up fighting.
Will you do nothing?
It's as if he's already dead. But even after he's freed from Saruman's spell and reclaims his mind, we can see how Saruman may have gotten a foothold in his mind in the first place.
But I should live to see the last days of my house.
King Théoden is a pessimist. He refuses to ride out and fight his enemy. Instead, he runs to the mountains to hide. Théoden puts on a pretense of optimism, but it's a very fragile charade. It cracks easily.
Within these walls, we will outlast them.
They do not come to destroy Rohan's crops or villages. They come to destroy his people, down to the last child.
What would you have me do? Look at my men. Their courage hangs by a thread.
Even though he's pessimistic, he does not really accept his pessimism. He fights against it. It's only at the end of the Battle of Helm's Deep, as Théoden's army has retreated as far as they possibly can, that Théoden finally accepts his pessimism.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
Ride out with me.
The irony here is that in truly accepting his pessimism,
Ride out and meet
he finally becomes heroic.
For death and glory.
for Rohan.
This is the counterintuitive wisdom that King Théoden's arc teaches us, and also remains a recurring theme in The Lord of the Rings. We find hope within despair. It's only after embracing his pessimism fully that King Théoden shines, that he finds his true calling, which is to say badass shit while leading his army into a hopeless battle.
Fell deeds awake.
Now for wrath, now for ruin, and the Red Dawn!
So good and tasty.
But Théoden only embraces his truth because he had Aragorn there to remind him of it. In a sense, it was Aragorn who discovered Théoden's calling and led him to it. And Théoden is the first to admit that.
It was not Théoden of Rohan who led our people to victory.
Thus, he has not yet completed his arc. In Return of the King, Théoden is given a second chance. He's challenged yet again with war. He's asked yet again to ride out and meet his enemy. But this time, it's not to defend his own people, but to defend another people.
And Rohan will answer.
This already registers a big change in the character, but there's still more to come. After a long and arduous ride, they finally arrive in Gondor to find the armies of Mordor far larger and more powerful than they could have imagined. But Théoden doesn't run to hide in the mountains like before, nor does he put on a pretense of optimism, no. He rouses his men with one of the hardest speeches of all time, a speech which does not inspire his people to cling to a false hope, but shows them how to find hope within despair.
Arise! Arise, riders of Théoden! Spears shall be shaken! Shields shall be splintered! A sword day! A red day! And the sun rises!
What's so great about this speech is that it represents Théoden returning to where he began. When we first met him, Théoden was dead. And here at the end of his life, as he leads his army into an unwinnable battle, he is for the first time fully alive.
Rise now!
Bursting with life,
Rise now!
which he expresses
Rise! Rise for ruin! And the world's ending!
by chanting one word. One of the very best choices that Boyens, Walsh, and Jackson made was giving Aragorn an arc. I'm pretty sure that in the books, Aragorn is basically ready to become king right from the start. In fact, he's carrying Andúril, the Flame of the West, right from the very first time we meet him. I think there's actually an exchange that goes something like this. "We gonna make you the king," said Gandalf. "Word up," said Aragorn. And that's on page 2. But in the films, Aragorn is incredibly reluctant to become king. Apart from this being a mythical motif, what Joseph Campbell calls the refusal of the call, this choice makes Aragorn a far more flawed, relatable, and human character. But, writers beware, this is not just a choice made out of thin air, it is based on the original text. In some ways, this makes more sense based on what Aragorn is actually doing when we first meet him. Remember, he's a ranger of the north. And in case you're not a mega nerd who knows the map of Middle-earth by heart, that means he's way up here fighting the spies of Sauron, while the center of the human world is way down here in Gondor, who are actively fighting to keep the cork in the bottle of evil that is Mordor. It's not that Aragorn isn't doing anything, it's that he places himself deliberately on the periphery of the human world, until 4 hobbits fall into his care, and he's called to a higher purpose. At first, Aragorn is only involved in this quest to destroy the ring because he sees how important it is, and because in destroying the ring he might finally undo the mistake that Isildur made 3,000 years before. He had no intentions of becoming the king of men, and in fact he still behaves as a ranger rather than as a leader. For example, when they reach Weathertop, Aragorn leaves the hobbits to go out scouting. A huge mistake which nearly costs Frodo his life. This is not how a leader behaves, this is how a ranger behaves. The reason he behaves this way is very simple. Aragorn continues to remove himself from the center of the action because he's afraid. No, he's not afraid of fighting, he's about as competent as a person can get at fighting. Rather, he's afraid of wielding power. He's afraid of being corrupted. He doesn't trust himself. But it goes much beyond that. He doesn't trust mankind in general, especially the kings of men. And thus he spends all his time with the elves, and with wizards, and hobbits, and with the wilderness. This distrust of mankind is perfectly personified by Boromir, a man who does not distrust mankind, not at all. Boromir is the perfect foil for Aragorn. You can see the difference in their attitudes towards mankind, and specifically Gondor, in this exchange.
Have you ever been called home by the clear ringing of silver trumpets? I have seen the White City long ago.
But the similarity between these two men is that neither of them really have faith in Gondor's ability to win the war.
It is long since we had any hope.
Boromir wants to use the ring because he thinks without it Gondor doesn't stand a chance. He's actually quite pessimistic. Aragorn is not only pessimistic about Gondor's ability to win the physical war, but the spiritual war as well. But towards the end of the first film, this attitude begins to change. Aragorn is tempted by the ring, and as Arwen predicted, he resists the temptation. But here's the contradiction that this victory presents Aragorn. If he, a man, can resist temptation, then perhaps other men can too. Perhaps there is more strength in his blood than he realized. And perhaps the only reason that mankind has been corrupted is precisely because all the good men, like him, have forsaken their responsibility. This realization comes to the surface with Boromir's death.
I do not know what strength is in my blood, but I swear to you I will not let the White City fall. Nor our people fail.
When Aragorn says our people, this isn't just an expression of their racial connection as men. It's an expression of Aragorn stepping out of his exile. He has learned something from Boromir, a man who from the very start took responsibility for all of mankind and bore that burden upon his own shoulders. The word our here has less to do with their shared identity and more to do with their shared responsibility. In his final moments, after thinking he had failed his lifelong mission to protect mankind, Boromir realizes that was never his responsibility. It was Aragorn's. By saying these two words, our people, Aragorn lifts that burden from Boromir's shoulders. He says, I'll take it from here. You can see the relief wash over Boromir's face as he realizes this.
Our people. Our people. Followed you, my brother. My captain. My king.
With his final words, Boromir acknowledges Aragorn as king. But Aragorn is not quite ready to accept himself as king. In fact, others recognize him as king long before he does. Even Sauron recognizes him as king. Even though Aragorn is no longer hiding on the fringes of the world and he's come a little closer to the center, he's still happy just to remain there, to ride with Rohan into the final battle at the end of days. After taking a few steps towards his truth, he falls into a new status quo at Théoden's side. Then, in a scene entirely invented for the film, Aragorn receives a new call to adventure.
They will answer to the King of Gondor. Anduril, flame of the west, forged from the shards of Narsil.
Anduril is a symbol which goes far beyond a Freudian phallus. It is a flame, a torch passed down from that same generation that Aragorn fears becoming. It's only in this moment that Aragorn finally accepts his role as king and ceases to remove himself from the fight. And the beautiful irony is that the very first thing he does once he accepts this is to remove himself from the fight. Aragorn leaves Rohan behind. To the Rohirrim, Aragorn is running away. But in reality, Aragorn is finally confronting his shadow head on after a lifetime of running away. He is finally confronting his ancestors and claiming his divine right to rule. Aragorn's motivation is never to become king, to glorify himself. At every turn, he risks his life gladly to protect others. But what he comes to realize is the best way to protect others is to glorify himself, to become king. Aragorn was never really in danger of becoming like his ancestor Isildur. His only weakness was his fear of becoming like him, which kept him from fulfilling his destiny. And yet this fear, this reluctance to rule, is exactly what makes him suitable to rule. It's only the man who does not desire power, fame, and glory who deserves it.
This day does not belong to one man, but to all.
Aragorn's weakness becomes his strength. His fear of his own power becomes the source of his power. As complex and counterintuitive as many of these arcs are, by far the most nuanced of them all is Frodo's. Sam's arc is probably the most obvious and the most classical. He must go from a stuttering, shy boy into a fearless, confident man. This is the prototypical male coming-of-age arc, the passage from yin to yang, an embrace of a proactive willpower, to press on against any obstacles, to fight with every last ounce of energy. Thus, the completion of Sam's arc comes at this moment.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you! Come on!
But arguably this moment is also the completion of Frodo's arc, because Frodo's arc is almost the exact opposite of Sam's. Frodo begins thinking that he must be active, that he must be the leader of the Fellowship, the protagonist. He thinks he must wield a sword and fight, and although he exists in a community of friends, he's often seen alone. Galadriel tells him this, of course, but he already knew it. He knew he had to bear this burden to be a brave and solitary martyr. But what Frodo must embrace is not his proactivity, but his passivity. Frodo must let go of his willpower. He must accept his reliance on others, on Sam, on Gandalf, on Sam, on Aragorn, on Sam, on Gollum, and especially on Sam. He is furthest from this truth when he isolates himself, when he pushes Sam away, when he follows his curiosity, when he claims,
"The ring was entrusted to me. It's my task. Mine. My own."
When he tries to do something proactive like go through the front gates of Mordor, or bring the ring to the Nazgul. Frodo is closest to his truth when he does nothing. His pity for Gollum, which stays his hand, is ultimately what secured the quest's victory. He's closest to his truth when he follows his leaders, when he lets Sam take care of him, when he doesn't stray from the path laid before him. It's as if Frodo has to accept the fact that this was never his quest at all, that he was merely a puppet being controlled by Providence, that he doesn't even really exist as an individual. Frodo is a figure of absolute selflessness in two senses. On the one hand, he's selfless because his motivation is to save the Shire, even though he knows he's not saving it for himself. On the other hand, he's selfless because he empties himself of his own will. Frodo completes his arc when he becomes a perfectly passive object, carried by another. This emptiness is two-sided, of course, because it gives evil a foothold to control him. In the book, Gollum dances his way off the edge and falls into the fire, whereas in the Jackson adaptations, Frodo gathers his strength for one last wrestle with the enemy. This is an interesting change, but it's one that complicates Frodo's arc all the more. In any case, Frodo becomes like the ring itself, less an individual and more of a narrative device, an object that once had a personality, but now is little more than a symbol. This is why his choice to go to Valinor is the only conclusion to his journey and his arc that makes any sense at all. He can only look forward to becoming an even more perfectly passive object, to uniting with the light, to his death. In a sense, this is all summed up perfectly in one passage from the book.
In a world filled with mirth and magic, you lose time in yourself. You agree with this statement from Frodo?
You lose time within yourself. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
You begin to forget yourself, I think.
Yes, and I think that's exactly what Frodo goes through. Because ultimately, by the end of Frodo's journey, he doesn't have...
It's a bad question. It's a bad question. Forget it.
In conclusion, Tolkien's books and Jackson's adaptations both approach character arcs in a subtle and genius way. They don't make these characters change entirely from one person into another person. They rather have these characters become more and more who they already are. The world can be a pretty scary place. Things can seem really hopeless. This is true even when there isn't horrible political turmoil all around us. But what great fiction like The Lord of the Rings shows us is what Joseph Campbell said once: we are not on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves. But in doing that, we save the world. We are not all called to be leaders, but we are all called to play our part. We can all be honest about our own weaknesses, and then realize that therein lies our unique powers. I am so grateful to everyone who takes the time to watch these videos. I'm especially grateful to my 4 newest patrons: Ellis, who is teaching me how to lucid dream; Rahman Yusuf, who can bench press 10 pounds; Christian Viazzo, who has been my best friend since childhood, actually; and Fenson, who is my brother, my captain, my king. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really like this video, check out my Patreon where you can find a bonus video essay on auteur theory and Galaxy Quest. Once again, thank you for watching, and...